let me introduce our guest speakers, and we're going to talk a bit about cycling in London. And I'm there. And first of all, Ruth and Ruth Mayorcas. I'll just give you a brief word. And you've had some experience of cycling in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam in particular. And you used to cycle, and then you used to travel to work. And before it was called commuting, and but you really became put off, as so many women do in particular, by how dangerous it felt. And you've been for some years involved in a campaign called Stop Killing Cyclists, which is quite a big Facebook group and campaigning group, and that really highlights some of the challenges that cyclists have. And Paul, I've known for quite a long time through various things we've been involved in, and Paul's been involved in climate change campaigning. You've said for 35 years. I don't know if that's in your bio, whether you forgot to update it, but it's probably more perhaps now. But you've also been the chair of the London Cycling Campaign, and have been very involved in the Midi Holland active travel program. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that. And you've done a lot of work in liaising with councils, which is so key in getting things going. And then finally, Charlie Allenby, who has been, what was it, your first bike was a BMX and then a Cannondale, and you are of the breed of enthusiastic cyclists that always has as the saying goes, an eye on a bike, N+1, N being the number of bikes that your partner knows about, and the +1 is the one that she doesn't know about.
Yeah.
Or people who change their bike's color so that your partner doesn't realize that it's actually a new bike. And so you have also just recently published a book called Bike London, a guide to cycling in the city. And so welcome to all of our guests. And so with that introduction, just maybe, let's start with Ruth. Let's start with you, and just tell us a little bit more about your cycling journey, your relationship with cycling, and really why you got so involved in Stop Killing Cyclists.
Okay. So like so many people born in the 50s, we learned to cycle at school. We did our cycling proficiency, now called bikeability. And we did all cycle, but I was a very clumsy child and fell off the bike more than I stayed on it. So I was more or less banned from cycling. And then, like many young people, at 17, I passed the driving test, and I did have a car, brought up in Chester, and did drive quite a lot. I did live in Amsterdam for a short while after being on a kibbutz for a year, and did import an old Dutch bike from there back to London. Lived in Chiswick, West London, where I still live, and used that all the time. Cycled to work on it all the time. As I say, we didn't call it commuting then. Everyone cycled to work, and we all wore skirts and high heels or trousers and brogues, whatever. And then the 80s, and there was a big uptick in driving, as we all know. And I lost confidence, and I was a location manager anyway, so I had to drive a lot for work. I then became pregnant and decided I was going to cycle more. And I actually cycled till I was 7.5 months pregnant. I then had my child, and I put him on the back of the bike. And by then in West London, was one of the few people who actually was continuing cycling. None of my girlfriends cycled. I knew very few people who had continued cycling from the 80s to the 90s. And I do think West London is quite different to other parts of London that I've been to, really. But eventually, November of 2013, having been in tears often cycling, and cycling with my child, where he'd be on the pavement, I'd be on the road, and I would have to watch out for both of us, trying to get to Richmond Park along the river, where it was really difficult. Tragically, in November of 2013, 6 people were killed in the 1 month, and Stop Killing Cyclists came into being, and I decided to become a member and became quite active with them. And it seemed to me that we'd all been a bit too polite about cycling in London till then. London Cycling Campaign, I'm afraid I felt were a bit nice about stuff. Sorry, Paul. And I rather liked the Stop Killing Cyclists kind of way of doing things, of doing die-ins, of being out there and being seen. Jump forward quickly, but since retirement, I now cycle massive distances. So yesterday I did a 73-mile bike ride with friends, and I do group cycling. And I think that, especially for women, cycling in a group gives you such confidence. It is fantastic, and you get to learn to handle your bike better. You get to see, if you're following someone else, you haven't got to think quite so hard. And my experience now, and I'm very, very super confident. My partner is Dutch, and we spend a lot of time cycling in Holland, obviously, where things are fantastic. Just to wind up, I'm sure I've spoken too much. One of my big bugbears, though, currently is on behalf of disabled people, because we all know it's difficult enough when you're fit and active to lift a bike up and over or through a barrier. But if you're on a trike, a recumbent, hand cycling, whatever, it's virtually impossible. So active travel is not 365 days a year like it would be in the Netherlands, say. And that's something that's got to be grasped. That's it for now.
Thanks, Ruth. I mean, just on an aside on the Netherlands thing, but we'll come back to that, but it didn't happen by accident in the Netherlands, so we'll perhaps come back to that topic. Everyone thinks it's a kind of given in Holland, but those of us who remember the 60s and so on, it was a very car culture place. Paul, tell us your London cycling LCC.
Well, it predates LCC because I've been cycled from when I was about 7 in Scotland. But in terms of London cycling campaign, just to go back to Ruth, actually, no need to apologise. I completely get about LCC. When I first got involved in the late 80s, a lot of the stuff we're doing was direct action on the ground, some really good demos, really good stuff. And what happened as LCC got bigger and became more effective, we got a very clear message for ministers are not going to talk to you if you carry on doing it. You're embarrassing us too much. I think many campaigns reach that point where they get to the point where do we actually start having conversations with the government, or do we carry on protesting? It's a very, very difficult one to call. So I think there's a place for LCC, and it's more kind of structured, organised thing. And SKC, I think the two sit very well. The interface between them may not be very comfortable, but I think both organisations are absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to me. I suppose my journey really was just horror in the late 80s, just how bad it was on the roads. Central London was absolutely horrendous, and all of London was, but really Central London, where there's such a focus on moving so many people in different modes, but cars were predominating. They were in the suburbs as well, and it was just getting nuts. Really, it was clear it wasn't a route forward that's sustainable, and so I got involved in cycle campaigning. I'm also a member of Living Streets, and for me active travel became a real holy grail of we have to start doing this. The car is killing active travel quite spectacularly, and so I think it was in about late 90s in Camden we built the first piece of physical infrastructure for a long time, protected cycle track down Royal College Street. It's followed by some more protected infrastructure that went in across through Bloomsbury, and those two shifts where you started to see normal people cycle, people who, people coming up to you say, I actually cycle and I would never have dreamed I'd be able to do this. It was like, this was the key. And that's, so when I moved to Waltham Forest and there's the opportunity to bid for the Mini Holland funding, we'd worked with the council, we'd developed some really good relationships. We had a very strong, passionate deputy leader who was prepared to lead on some really life-changing, very brave political decisions. And we built a very strong community support network. We just had all the right ingredients: good political leadership, strong community, and the funding. We had it all really. And so Mini Holland, without going into too much detail, is a combination of protected infrastructure along some of the busier kind of traffic conduits, busier routes, and low traffic neighbourhoods around about it. So basically you can cycle through quiet residential neighbourhoods without no through traffic, very low traffic volumes, very slow speeds. And when you're on the major roads, you've then got protected step cycle tracks to take you very much of the quality that we see in central London now along some of the main cycle superhighway routes. That sort of quality of physical protection is absolutely key. And also some great crossings and things like that.
Crossings, yeah, that's quite a key thing. Charlie, you've also been cycling for a long time, and you've also got, I imagine, quite a good perspective, having just written this book on the evolution of cycling in London, how it's gone from what we've been hearing about in the 80s to now. Tell us about your book and your cycling journey.
Yeah, definitely. So I've basically cycled as long as I can remember, really, from a 5-year-old sort of having the stabilizers taken off my first bike up to now where most journeys are taken on bike. And I think from my research in the book, what I found really interesting was how, cycling was the predominant form of transport for a long time in London. And then suddenly this explosion of car culture, it really sort of put cycling and any infrastructure at all on the back burner. And it's now only through sort of campaigns such as Stop Killing Cyclists and LCC that we're seeing real progress. Firstly, mainly in central London. I've lived in London since 2014, and the changes that I've seen, you look at the embankment, for example, like that has changed beyond recognition. From my perspective, I live sort of on the Haringey-Enfield borders, and I would love to see more progress like what you see in Waltham Forest with the Mini Holland scheme. Because while obviously you have some very progressive councils, I think Hackney's quite a good one. You get others who are sort of dragging their heels, and it seems to me like there's been a real success in central London, and now that sort of just needs to be extrapolated out to the suburbs really, and make active travel a real option for those who maybe don't feel as comfortable as or confident as a cyclist who's got 15 years experience or 20 years experience on a bike.
So actually I used to live in Sussex, and I used to commute to London, and I used to go around, and then I used to cycle to the station and then take the train to London. And because I was a bit terrified of cycling in London, although I was quite happy cycling around in the countryside in Sussex. Although for some people they say, "Oh God, cycling around the country lanes, it's a bit scary," but I guess it's what you're used to. But actually, for me, the 2005 the video, if those of you were here at the beginning of this of our session today, was the naked bike ride in 2005, and I was there for that. And I remember thinking, London is pretty flat, really. Why don't I bring my bike on the train? And actually cycling naked around London was my initiation to think, actually, yeah, it's okay. But I remember because I was kind of freelance journalist at the time. I had to go around lots of places, and the cycling infrastructure was, in terms of you arrive somewhere, where am I going to put the bike? Having to tying up the lamppost, in the way and everything. So that's kind of another thing. I don't know if that's really improved, but yeah, Ruth.
It's okay. I want to tie in a couple of things here. So, yes, of course, we all know, most of us have seen how awful it was in Holland, and then they had to get to where they are now. But we can't keep using that as an excuse. Oh, well, Holland wasn't always like Holland. Well, no, it wasn't, but they are where they are now. And we should be building on their experience and what they do instead of saying, well, it took them a while. Yeah. And the biggest problem that we have is that London, for example, is 32 boroughs and the City of London. So at every junction, every borough boundary, there's an issue. And I'm sorry again, Paul, but because I'm on Ideas with Beers, and every time Waltham Forest is mentioned, there's a klaxon. If we're still digging up the one successful place, then we have failed. Chiswick, West London, we've got Cycleway 9. It's fantastic for about, I don't know, I'm not very good at half a mile, I think, if that. The junctions are a disaster. Kew Bridge, which, for anyone who knows, goes from Chiswick to Richmond. The compromise for the cycle lane and the better facilities for walking was to remove some safe passage across the bridge for cycling. So the problem we now have, especially for women, I'm sorry, it is women, I think, is people will commute. Commuting people will commute. What we're not doing is getting the women to go shopping in the middle of the day, or men with their children, or to be outside the commuting hours. So it's all very well that the embankment is very busy in the morning and in the evening. I use it during the day and it is quite empty, but that's because I've got the confidence to get to it. Mm-hmm. So until we join everything up, and the Chrome manual is about continuity, comfort, we are not going to get gear change that Grant Shapps is kind of going on about. Sorry, I'm quite negative. I was accused of being glass half empty instead of glass half full. If you don't make the junction safe, it is always glass half empty, because people will get injured. And that's the biggest problem we have.
I mean, I guess you know the numbers, but I get a bit better than me. But I guess that's often the pinch points that you hear of lorries turning left and those kind of things, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. But it's the lack of joined up thinking, isn't it? You're talking about all these different boroughs, and I mean, the mayor, I mean, doesn't really have as much power as we imagine. I guess that's it, isn't it? Or is there
true, and also things, that Sustrans is a charity, an underfunded charity, in the same way as the LCC is, and Cycling UK. I mean, Route 4, the famous Route 4, which many of you must know because it goes from one side of the country to the other, it is impassable at so many areas because it's got barriers, it's mud, it's,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I live in Somerset now, so I'm quite familiar with the issues. And Somerset County Council is, I've just been having discussions about, what a disaster they are as well. But yeah. So Charlie, tell us more. You think what your book reveals? Yes, I mean, is some encouragement to cheer us up from Ruth's.
Sorry,
no, it's okay. Anyway, we're not asking for body painting on this part of the program.
I think what my book did sort of reveal, because it sort of covered local bike shops, cycling events, bike builders, cycle hire, clothing and accessories. So it's sort of a broad spectrum of what you can and what the bike community is in London. And the one thing that I did get from it is that there is change afoot, and more people who aren't your stereotypical cyclist are getting on two wheels or are getting interested in getting on two wheels. So for example, there's a bike shop called London Bike Kitchen in Hackney, and they are very progressive. They do sort of workshop classes for specific ones for people of colour or non-binary people, and they're trying to bring people into cycling who aren't mammals, aren't men in lycra or your traditional cyclist. And I think from my own experience during, say, lockdown last year, the first one in particular, I saw people out on bikes who you'd never see. That's the demographics of people on bikes was amazing. And I think, unfortunately, it's as soon as the cars came back, people were scared off again. So until you have infrastructure that a non-cyclist would feel comfortable cycling on, you're not going to get the women and their kids going, or the men and the kids going to the shops. Sorry, I've turned it into a negative again. But yeah. Sorry, Paul, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Paul.
I just wanted to kind of pick up on what's been said and particularly what Ruth was saying about group rides. I started running the Walthamstow Family Bike Club back in about 2007, and we were having families with youngsters as young as 3 or 4. And I think the power of group rides, of those sorts of setups, especially if they're kind of not too regimented in terms of having to book and stuff like that, you just turn up and go, which I think works really well for families. That I think is a really good way to start things. And we've got Joyriders and Cycle Sisters in Waltham Forest, both of which are excellent examples of reaching out to communities that don't typically cycle, Muslim women and their kids typically, getting them out in large numbers on bikes. You can do that, having the physical infrastructure helps. It's not absolutely necessary as long as you have a good marshalling team and that confidence to take cyclists and protect them. They feel protected. And I think the thing really is you can set stuff up like that. You don't have to have the physical infrastructure, but having it is hugely helpful, hugely beneficial. It's not an essential. The other thing I'd say is in Waltham Forest, we're lucky that as a campaign group, we're able to say there are 2 fundamental principles to stuff you design, because we could get involved in detailed design and get disappointed and ask things like that. 2 fundamentals, one of which has already been mentioned, which is continuous protection. It's no good giving up at junctions. You're wasting your money. If it stops before you get to a junction or a difficult bit where the road gets now, forget it. Not even worth building in the first place. It's just wasting government or TfL money. The other thing really is if you design stuff, what we're saying in Waltham Forest, it should be fit for a sole 80-year-old to be able to use it. Absolutely critical. There's really no point in building stuff that only somebody who's 20 and understands the complexities of road interaction. So again, it's got to be really simple, really straightforward, which means typically you have green phases, pedestrians and cycles. You don't ask cyclists to start juggling with other traffic and things like that. You have that sense of time separation or physical separation to ensure you have a ride which is really unstressful and enjoyable.
I mean, I'm noticing some of the comments from Mark in the chat of even his 14-year-old daughter getting abuse from drivers, and I think there's also the thing, I think it was called Ride London, where they close off the central London for a big cycling thing. And I mean, I know from our own experience of the London Naked Bike Ride that I've quite often seen people joining it who clearly haven't ridden their bikes for a very long time, with kind of rust buckets, and somehow the group ride has given them confidence to say, I want to come out and do that thing. And I think that, and I remember once going in London, there was literally, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of these kids on BMX bikes and so on. I don't know what ride that was called. Yeah. There was some so I think all of these group rides, and as you're saying, I think it seems to me they're quite good entry points to get people to say, oh, actually, it's not so bad. The key is to get them to go beyond that, to say, I can do this on my own. Ruth, you're going to add something.
Oh, well, the Kids on Bikes is part of Bikes Up, Knives Down. Which was a big campaign group, which was, if they're on bikes, they're not with knives. Yeah. A lot of people don't like them at the moment because they do wheelies in traffic. And in fact, Jan and I had to protect a bloke from them because they were about to beat him up, and we talked them down, and then he skedaddled off. Image is another thing, which is probably what the Naked Bike Ride is also about. I do wear clothes, but you can see what I'm doing. We must stop this lycra and helmet for every image with every promotion thing for cycling. And Cycle Sisters, Joy Riders is now in Hounslow, and it's incredibly successful for Muslim women and what have you. But I despair when every promotional photo has the lycra and the high-vis jackets and the helmets. And people say, well, people can wear what they like. But the problem is it's becoming the default uniform, as opposed to, and if I'm telling a driver off for being on their mobile phone next to me, they'll go, well, where's your helmet? And I mean, I never wear one. And, I shouldn't have to wear one. And we must stop this photographing. London Cycling Campaign did do it. They're getting better. British Cycling, Cycling UK. They all seem to feel they've got to show people in helmets. I know Chris Borman said that once the BBC wouldn't photograph him because he didn't have a helmet on, and therefore they'd get a lot of flack from it. But I think image is everything. It's got to be people of all shapes, all sizes, all colours, wearing, non-cycling gear, preferably.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I don't know if there's a little passing word. Maybe that is your passing word, Ruth. But particularly with your Dutch experience, look like a normal person. It doesn't have to be a special thing. Paul, what message do you have for us?
I think a couple of things, really. One is from a campaigning perspective, if you're dealing with council officers and with politicians, make sure you also big up the good stuff they've done. So most politicians and officers tend to hear from people who are angry, who are cross, where you've not done stuff. It's really important to try and work with those relationships and say, actually, okay, so that stuff's not so good, but what you did there was fantastic. Well, it's a really good step in the right direction. We need more of that. So really focus on building up, the sense of confidence. So you're not always going to be, shooting them down for stuff they haven't done. The other thing really is, in terms of campaigning, it's important to think about your campaign team, assuming it's not you're just not a sole campaigner on your own, and use and try and deploy people in your campaign team so that those who perhaps got the really good social skills are dealing with the public or dealing with key politicians or whatever, and those with technical skills who perhaps might not be so good at dealing with people, they can maybe deal with design and factors and things like that. So think very hard about your campaign team and where they might be best utilised, because I think it's very easy to get an angry campaigner and you're sitting with a council officer who just gets switched off because they just hear them ranting all the time. So it's a couple of tips there.
I think that's the thing, is having people either wearing a different T-shirt of, now I'm an angry campaigner, and now I'm working with people with a suit and tie, and having, or having people, they serve different functions. Charlie?
I guess my thing is, keep doing events like World Naked Bike Ride. I think they're a fantastic contribution to the London cycling community. And I guess just, keep supporting your local bike shops, keep doing that sort of thing, because I think that's really key in making London the vibrant place it is to cycle.
Great. Well, thank you. That was really interesting, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you to Paul, and thank you to Charlie. And I think I put the link to your book in there, and I'll put a link up to London Stop Killing Cyclists as well.
And Bike is Best. Bike is Best is a very good campaign.
Can you put the link in? Have you got the link there?
I'm not good at links.
Not a good link. Okay, no. Bike is Best. I'll try and
Google Bike is Best.
I'll try and
they've got a very good campaign at the moment.
And then great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.